Working It Out, a podcast show about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our workplaces, our communities, and our lives. A show where we put diversity and inclusion to work.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out. Dr. V.
Welcome, I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver. In season 1 of Working It Out, I spoke with Deborah Sy Munster, Executive Vice President of Paramount, about the rise of anti-Asian bias. I made a commitment that this would not be a one and done show. So I'm continuing to explore this important topic with today's guest, the renowned Claire Tse, founder of Tse Solutions. Claire is a phenomenal woman. First of all, she's first generation Chinese American. She is renowned as a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert. And she works with clients to identify strategies and approaches to overcome generational, racial, and gender bias so that teams and groups of people can work together more effectively and achieve both tactical and strategic successes in their organizations. And Claire is an author. She co-authored the book, The Solve Communication Method, which explains how language and cultural nuances can impact or aid or impede how we communicate with each other. And so, Claire, I just want to thank you so much for being in our show today and being willing to share your expertise on this whole status of anti-Asian hate. So thank you so much, Claire.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Weaver, for your kind words and also honoring me to share some of the thoughts and the experiences, of what's going on with the API community.
Well, Claire, I know that you have, and thank you for that. I know that you have some data. We usually start our segments with doing a did you know? And that's part of my training, just being like a data person, right? Mm-hmm. Let's stop Asian hate. It's really important for people to know this kind of epidemic rise in the anti-Asian hate that's occurring in our country. For example, since March 19, 2020 to March 31st, 2021, there have been about 6,600 reports of anti-Asian discrimination. And then when you break down those numbers, 65% verbal harassment, 18% shunning, like avoiding, and also the scary piece on top of all of that is almost 13% consists of physical assault. And what's interesting is that when they looked at these reported incidents of anti-Asian hate, 65% of them were reported by Asian women. So it seems like Asian women are taking the lead and ensuring that the country and people know the kind of experiences they're having in their communities. Is this consistent with what you understand, Claire?
Yes, this is exactly what's happening. And the reason that a lot of the women are speaking up, because culturally, the men and the women have said, keep your head down and, just keep going forward regardless of what's going on. And what happens is then, because a lot of us are the matriarchs in the family, it's like, you can disrespect me, you can attack me. But what happens is that others are actually attacking our elders, which is revered in each of our cultures. And we said, we need to stop this. And we need to say, I can't be quiet anymore. Because, as your numbers are, those numbers are actually underreported. Because a lot of us don't say anything because we're trained as kids to say, keep your head down, keep moving forward, and, bring pride to your family.
And so reporting this brings what? If it doesn't bring pride, does it bring embarrassment or shame? What's the flip of that?
Well, what happens is then we've experienced this. I've experienced it all my life. As a perpetual foreigner, you speak English so well. And some of those issues around the model minority myth, where people feel that API individuals are we're handed our successes, and, our hard work is not worth it. I mean, because your numbers really speak to it. In terms of the API hate crimes, it's up 169% in 2021 alone. Black hate crimes are 88%, Latina hate crimes are 38%. And in New York City, it's up 223%.
223%.
Mm-hmm. We have a lot of population there. In San Francisco, 140%.
So that percentage gets higher where there's a bigger population of Asians.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Claire, one of the things that you talked about, and I just, I wanted to be able to have this conversation, a candid conversation. And I said to you, I said, Claire, when I look at these stories in the media, with the exception of that Atlanta story, most of them show Blacks and Latinas, but particularly Blacks, perpetuating some of this physical harm and assault against Asians. And I said, is that your understanding? Is that what the data says? And of course, my team went out and researched it, and we found that 75% of the incidents of anti-Asian hate, unfortunately, are by whites, not the majority being Black. But what's the talk? I mean, what's the kind of private conversations about who's perpetuating this and why?
Yeah, I think part of that, what with the groups that I've been working with, is that it's the Blacks are really highlighting because they want to pit us against each other. The mono minority, the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color. If BIPOC is supposed to really work and focus in on what the Black, community is experiencing, how come everyone is getting killed? One a day. And it's just, at least that are reported. And there's that, they're pitting against each other. And I think that's part of it. Also, we don't want to have, the whites bringing it up, even though they're doing most of the hate crimes. Mm-hmm. It's just easier minority versus minority.
Well, we could talk about it in percentages, but each one of these percentages represents a real person, right?
Absolutely.
Impacted themselves, their family have been impacted. I shared the stat that 75% of these anti-Asian hate crimes are being perpetrated by whites against Asians. Yet when we look in the media, well, at least what I've seen is that most of those crimes, the video treatment has been Blacks against Asians. And you were making a really interesting point. I wanted you to underscore that again for us. And it was a part about this divisiveness and kind of, separating groups. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, part of that is, taking a look at what the media is doing, is that they're taking a look at, Black hate crimes around Asians. And what happens is then, they're not living long enough to really, go through the whole process. It's just a one and done, they walk by. But if you take a look at Atlanta, that was a white man, and, he was able to get handcuffed and said he had a bad day. And, and it's the kind of thing where same thing happened in Boulder. The white men that are perpetrators, they live long enough to get handcuffed. And so, this is part of the really struggle and the fear factor for the API community, because we were partnering, we were there for Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they're coming in and just saying, okay, well, we're going to hit your elder because we're angry about this whole mask thing, or we're angry about the pandemic because it's the yellow peril that happened.
Well, Claire, at the end of our show, we asked you to share with our listeners and our viewers some tips and some advice. I'd like for you to come and talk about what can we do, Black, white, Latina, Asian, to really come together to address this. But I wanted to kind of move into what's being done. And one of the points you made in our first segment was that before, when these hate crimes were happening, oftentimes people in the Asian community didn't often report them, but they're reporting them now. So what are some of the efforts that are going on now around this anti-Asian hate? Is it training? Is it more conversation? What's going on to stop it?
Yeah, right now, some of the clients I'm working with are having listening sessions, able to really hear what's going on with the API colleagues that are in the workplace. You know, they're in corporate offices, they're in stores, they're in, you know, retail and wholesale. And what happens is then they're listening to what the experience is, the fear factor, the lack of advancements, marginalization that we've never really spoken about before. And that's really helpful. Also, what happens, there's a lot of workshops around the cultural aspects of marginalization, and also what can we do from a bystander inside the organization.
I'm really curious about these workshops, and I wanted to talk to you about that because we were doing, you know, my company Alignment Strategies, we were doing some work with multicultural women in a major Fortune 100 company. And we had Black women, Latina women, Asian women in the session. And what struck me was that when the kind of pain and angst that the Asian women really share with us about this whole anti-Asian hate. And the fact that they felt that they had to come to work and look all buttoned up and look all like nothing was really going on when they were just fearful and crying on the inside. And it was so powerful when they opened up and told us their stories about their fear of their children going to school, you know, the fear of their elders, and how they had to come to work and not have conversations like it wasn't anything happening. And so when you talked about these organizations that are having listening sessions, that sounds like a best practice, because it seems to, it supports having real talk, real communications, real conversations on that anti-Asian hate experience that many colleagues are feeling in their workplaces.
Yes, I agree. And what happens is, though, before we have those listening sessions, we've had the prep sessions to actually give the Asian colleagues opportunities and permission to break out of their culture. Because, you know, this is so uncomfortable for us to say. We can't say that, you know, oh, I've been discriminated against. Oh, I was overlooked. I'm fearful of even getting on the subway. And that's the type of thing that, you know, you don't want to bring shame to the family, but more importantly, it's like, you know, suck it up and keep going forward. And so we've had the pre-meetings before the listening meetings to allow people to actually share their stories, because they don't talk about it at home.
They don't talk about it at home, and then they're not talking about it at work. So it's something that they must be just bottling up inside. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, the women, you know, the tears were so intense and so full that it really made all of us come to tears too, because you can feel the angst that they were feeling. So Claire, what's happening? So companies are having these listening sessions where they're getting people together to talk about it. What else is happening? I mean, what's happening in the Asian community to prepare them to defend themselves should they be confronted with an anti-Asian attack, hate attack?
Well, luckily we have some advocates in terms of some of the actors that have been speaking up to Senate. Luckily we had the Asian hate crime that was finally signed for the second time, you know, just a couple of weeks ago.
Was this with the President Biden's?
Yes.
Tie into the COVID-19 hate crime bill? Okay.
Yes, finally, because what happened is that it was presented, you know, we were advocating it, and with the, they didn't want to say, oh, we don't want to say it's a hate crime. Because, you know, I don't know if it's too much work, or, you know, you're a small population and we are the fastest growing, cultural and nationality population in the country right now.
Well, you know, again, one hate crime is one too many. And so I was so glad that they signed that bill, but I do know that it was a lot of concern expressed, that it wasn't like, the wording wasn't more powerful enough and more descriptive of the incidents and the experiences that our Asian communities are feeling. Okay, so we have this anti-Asian hate crime bill that was signed. We have the listening sessions that companies are doing. It struck me when I was looking at one show where this Asian woman was talking about the fact that they're having more self-defense courses or classes in the Asian community. Are you aware of that?
Yes. Yeah. And they're being offered, for self-defense for both the men and the women.
Great. Well, Claire, I want you to talk about what it is you're doing, because I know that your profile in this whole space is just quadruple in terms of people understanding who you are, wanting to know about what you do, in particular with this bystander training. I mentioned that you've been very involved in this whole anti-Asian hate movement. And every time I'm reading something or seeing something on the internet, I see your name in it. So tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and what you hope to accomplish.
Part of what I'm working on is with different clients, taking a look at, what is really going on, having active listening, checking in with folks, because what happens is then a lot of the API individuals that I'm working with, it's like, I'm invisible. It's like, if Black Lives Matter was a really big thing, but these Asian hate crimes, these are one and done. Oh, Atlanta, that's too bad. And what happens is then I'm actually working with senior leaders to being an inclusive leader to really check in with their Asian folks, especially, a lot of people are going to the office, some people are not, and there's some isolation. And there's a lot of depression going on. And, I'm taking care of my family, I'm taking care of work, I'm being overlooked, and I got passed over. I'm working so hard, I gave up all of these events, and I'm, still not being seen as leadership material. And so what I'm doing is I'm working with them to really identify these are skill sets that are there, and you're not seeing it.
And it's interesting that you're taking this approach. So I know that you're doing bystander training and really facilitating these listening circles and conversations, meaningful conversations. But what I hear you also saying is that there are some real issues impacting Asian Americans in the workplace, such as equity around advancement and promotion. And oftentimes people assume that Asians have it all together and they're the model minority, the preferred minority, so that they're getting all the benefits. And what you're stating, and what I know to be fact, is that Asians are underrepresented in senior leadership positions in organizations. Asian women have challenges around getting promoted and to senior level management. So it's good that this conversation is occurring, because it's not just about the anti-Asian hate examples we talked about, but it's also the cultural and the kind of biases that go on in our workplaces that impact Asian men and women. So thank you for sharing it with us. So how is it working out? I mean, are you seeing change occur?
We're doing very minimal change, honestly, because what happens is that the Asian men and women are still asked to work really hard. They're, the whole model minority myth, they work really hard, but they're not recognized. They're speaking up, and then their managers are telling them, you need to speak up more. It's like, I have been speaking up. Have you not heard me? And, part of that is also they're not at the table. They're not at the decision-making process. And so that's what the strategic plans are so important, with really executable KPIs to say, unless you measure it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
And especially,
so tell us what KPI means.
Oh, the key performance indicators, okay. Because unless you measure success, it's not going to happen. And with the Asians, it's like they've been, I keep hearing even people coming in from different countries that are their Asian, cultural backgrounds. They said, well, we work really hard. I have this opportunity. And then I come to this country, and all of a sudden in the United States, and I'm like overlooked. Or, we're working really hard. That's great. You have to wait your turn.
And it's interesting because the stats show that there's been a significant increase in the number of Asians who have come over here to study who decide to go back home. And that's been a shift, because before there was a tendency to want to stay in America. But now the Asians are going back to China, or going back to Japan, or going back to Korea, or going back to places where they feel, number one, respected, appreciated, and that they can also contribute to the growth of their country, and they'll be valued as leaders. And so what the United States, through our bias and our challenge around providing equity for our Asian colleagues, we're suffering in terms of losing a significant element of our talent pool.
Yep, agreed. And because that's what we're feeling, is that if I'm not going to be recognized here, I'm going to go place where I am going to be recognized. I can have my skills and I can advance. It's the advancement. So many companies are working in Asia and the APAC area, and yet they don't have any Asian representation. So the Europeans, so the whites are making the decision, and they're recognizing it's like, oh, we don't really know the culture, we don't know the norms, and we don't know what the consumer needs are. Yes,
yes. Well, Claire, we have a few minutes left, and I know, having worked in this field for over 30 years, you have an abundance of advice you can give Asians, and you could give the corporations in which they work. So what would be 2 or 3 points of advice you want to share and leave with us as your continued gift to our audience?
I mean, with the API colleagues, I would say that we need to really step up and speak out, be able to say, this is why we should be recognized. This is how it has been helping the organization. And then this is what I need from you, because we haven't been asking. We've been waiting to be advanced. The other thing too is that with the people that are non-Asian Pacific Islanders, is like, make the effort to really reach out to your colleagues, find out what's going on. And also, with the bystander, are people being overlooked? Are people spoken over? Have we not created that space? Because people talk over each other here in the United States. And a lot of us that are Asians, it's like, we're waiting for that space to have, to be able to speak up. So we don't want to, pile on. So give us the space and the grace to allow us to really contribute everything that we can.
Well, Claire, those were 3 good points. And let me make sure that I captured them. One is to speak up, talk about your experiences, help educate and inform the organization about how you feel. And the second one was a big one: demand what you want. Don't assume that you're going to get it because folks are just going to do the right thing. Many people do, but a whole lot of people don't. So make a demand for what you want. And then the third point was for those corporations and companies to provide the space and the encouragement to understand the Asian experience, but also explore any particular biases, whether they be individual or systemic, that occur in your organization that could be getting in the way of Asians advancing into key leadership roles and being heard in terms of even some of the recognitions around approach to the business. Well, this has been a phenomenal conversation, as we always have, Claire, but I want you to look up Claire Tse of Tse Solutions. She is a phenomenal diversity, inclusion, and engagement expert, been doing this work for 30 years. And I commend you, Claire, for the work that you're doing to really address this whole issue of anti-Asian hate. So I'm Dr. Vanessa Weaver, your host of Working It Out, and I wish you a safe, productive, and be happy week.
Working It Out is brought to you by Alignment Strategies, a management consultancy with more than 3 decades of experience in diversity, equity and inclusion, and organizational development. To learn more, visit alignmentstrategies.com.
Got problems on the job, we're working it out. Workplace got you stressing, we're working it out. Yeah, we're working it out, working it out, working it out.